Propaganda under disguise. According to a report published in August, the United States has been penetrating South African media through the National Endowment for Democracy and other organizations and foundations. The report said the project was an example of U.S. state-sponsored efforts to influence public opinion abroad in ways favorable to its own selfish interests. Who is behind the project? How long have been such operations going on, and how has the project influenced public opinion in the region so far? I was joined by two authors of the report from Toronto, Ajit Singh, journalist and member of the international campaign No Cold War, and Roscoe, director of the Pan-African Institute for Socialism, joining us from Shanghai. Mr. Singh, let me go to you. The report that you published is entitled How the United States Has Penetrated South African Media, in which you detail how the U.S. state, with its private sector partners, have captured and continue to capture influential South African media. You called this a U.S. imperial project. Who exactly are the main players here, and what's their hidden agenda?
Yeah, that's a great question. The main player at the heart of the United States international influence operations is an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy. This was an organization created in 1983 under the Reagan administration. And in the words of its founders, it was created to take over the public face of the U.S. Influence operations around the world from the CIA, to do openly what the CIA used to do covertly. And this is because during the 60s and 70s, the reputation of the CIA and its covert operations became tarnished. And so the NED on a yearly basis issues thousands of grants in over 100 countries around the world. Between 2010 and 2020, this past decade, it's issued over $1 billion in grants. And a lot of these grants go to media organizations, a range of civil society organizations. But what we focused on were its funding towards media organizations, particularly in South Africa, where it has been financing since 2020 one of the major South African newspapers, Mail and Guardian, and has increasingly been working with private foundations, namely Luminate, which is a private foundation headed by Pierre Omidyar, who founded the Intercept investigative journalism website, and Open Society Foundations, which is headed by George Soros. And so this sort of public-private partnership is increasingly playing a role in media development, particularly in the Global South.
Roscoe, you claim in that report that this is a project hidden in plain sight. What do you mean, and what's the pattern of operation and scope in influencing public opinion?
Well, the NED's operation is vast, and as Ajit has said, it's been in operation since 1983. For example, in South Africa, it has funded many of the major publications as well as smaller projects. We have found at least 24 publications that have been funded by one or more of the major funders that regularly partner with the US government. And this is a massive footprint in terms of influencing. Its role is to increase the US soft power in South Africa and beyond into Africa. For example, it has funded the local chapter of the Media Institute of Southern African Swaziland, the Institute of the Advance of Journalism in South Africa, and many other institutes. The goal of this is to elevate a pro-US and a pro-Western narrative that often comes at the cost of African narratives and the African agenda for development.
There's a myriad of organizations ostensibly for journalism training or for media development, cooperation, some at a global scale, some at a national level or regional level. And Roscoe, both of you call it an alphabet soup of acronyms. What function do these so-called media organizations serve?
Well, as I said, they serve to push a narrative and then also to place people in key positions that sit on various within this influencing network. So we found that there's in fact a revolving door of people who work for organizations that are funded by NED and other organizations within this influence network of influence and U.S. State Department organizations. So at the time of writing the piece, we said that there were two editors who went on to work, former editors in chief of the Mail and Guardian, who've gone to work for Western government supported organizations. We've since found two more, and at least 15 people who passed through the fellowship program run by Amambungani, the investigative journalist unit, have been directly tied to US government organizations and programs. So this is building, it's building an influence network. It's building people that they can then place in institutions around the world to then cultivate further influence and to curate the narratives. Especially in this particular moment in history when the West and the US is just decoupling from the rest of the world.
So the main question here, Ajit, is how long, as you mentioned, the NED was founded in 1983, so the operation has been ongoing for a long time. But how long specifically have the operations been going on in South Africa, to your knowledge, to your investigation? I'm directing this question to Ajit. And how powerful has the project proven to be in shaping local public opinion?
Well, we uncovered that South Africa, shortly after the NED was founded in 1983, in its first and second year of operation, it was active in financing media in South Africa. At the time, in their own words, according to U.S. internal documents, they sought to, quote, counter strong Marxist campaigns in South Africa. It's important to note that this is South Africa at the time of apartheid. And the United States wasn't primarily interested in funding and financing media to promote an anti-apartheid message, but they were interested in promoting an anti-Marxist message. This is at the time of the Cold War. And it's illustrative of how the United States, the criteria for what it finances isn't, unfortunately, necessarily human rights and democracy, but it's geopolitical interests. And today, it appears that it's ratcheting up and returning to these sort of Cold War tactics as global tensions rise with China and Russia to be able to promote certain narratives and shape public opinion. I think we're not yet able to say what impact it's going to have. It's unfolding at the moment, and it's going to continue to unfold, as evidenced by the billions of dollars they're putting into their international media initiatives, as I'd outlined previously.
Roscoe, now for the ordinary people who are watching the news, who are reading the newspapers, what could they do? I mean, what are, for instance, some of the common characteristics among these media that have been captured, and how could ordinary consumers tell whether they're being fed with a secret agenda?
You know, here we have to rely on the common sense and the intuition of ordinary people who read the media. And what we need to do actually is to build some, is to counter the propaganda with facts. For example, one of the constant themes in these publications is the demonization of state actors that don't necessarily fit into the US and the global North's idea of hegemony. So one of the things we constantly hear about in Africa is that China involves in debt trapping certain states in Africa, when in fact that's just simply not true. China over the last 20 years has canceled more than $3.5 billion US in debt and refinanced $15 billion across Africa. Right at the moment, the IMF is negotiating with Ghana for a $3 billion credit facility. And on the table is, as usual with these international financial institutions, vital social programs and infrastructure projects, education. So in terms of Africa, what we're not looking for is more debt traps. We want partnerships. So we have to understand that the explicit demonization of particular state actors is done so with the express purpose of drawing an iron curtain down once again and bringing on the new Cold War, which is what the global North knows how to do. It's taking us to the brink, and we have to find other voices and other channels to counter this explicitly harmful narrative of the global North.
Roscoe, you talk about, the money being spent to promote U.S. interest and to increase U.S. soft power. Every country does that. What makes this penetration project so special or different, Roscoe?
The problem with this project is that it's so intimately tied with the U.S. State Department and the CIA. As Ajit says, the NED was set up to do overtly what the CIA could no longer do covertly, as it suffered tremendous reputational damage for fomenting coups and regime change all over the global South. So in terms of this influencing network hiding in plain sight, there is a pattern where the US and the West can act upon Africa and the global South in ways that other nations just simply cannot and do not. If this was an operation, let's say, of any other nation, for example, in China, we would hear about how scandalous it would be. But the US and these actors, the CIA and the NED, has for years acted with impunity in terms of its network of influence.
Finally, Ajit, the NED claims that it's dedicated to the growth and strengthening of democratic institutions around the world. For those who genuinely believe in democracy, how could you convince them that the NED is actually doing the right opposite across the world?
Well, it comes down to this. Democracy can't be imposed from outside by foreign countries. It's fostered by the people of a given nation. And we've seen time and time again that the United States, through entities like the NED, repeatedly will finance violent anti-democratic forces around the world. Unfortunately, the criteria for their funding is not whether a group is particularly democratic or humanitarian, it's whether it serves their geopolitical interests in a particular country. They fund groups who oppose political forces that they don't like. And those groups can exist on a spectrum of across the political spectrum, unfortunately. And so if we just look country after country where the NED and the United States financial footprint goes, the track record just isn't consistent with these so-called democratic ideals.
We have to leave it there. Many thanks to Ajit Singh, journalist with Grey Zone, and Roscoe Palm, director of the Pan-African Institute for Socialism, joining us from Toronto and Shanghai, respectively. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thanks for watching. We've got The Point.